The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Welcome to the Oracle of Luna. Today's guest, we have Katie Gerrard. Katie is a Seidr seer, author of the Seidr, The Gate is Open, and Odin's Gateways, and she's a Seidr teacher and spiritual coach. Welcome, Katie.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited, really excited to have you on the show. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, not bad. It's been really hot in the UK, so I'm quite lucky to be by the coast, which makes it much more bearable, as it were.
Oh, nice. Nice. Okay. Well, I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm just going to jump right in, okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just curious, how did it all begin? How did your interest in Norse witchcraft and specifically Seidr practice come about? Were you influenced? Were you influenced by a family member or at some place like at school? Or tell us a little bit about your early beginnings, because I think it's important, because that's how we're shaped that's what shapes us.
Yeah, so basically I was one of those teenagers who was really interested in and obsessed with kind of spirituality, with the occult, and with witchcraft and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time as a teenager sort of in the mind, body, spirit section of the local library, and just went through lots and lots of books. And I discovered witchcraft and paganism and thought, yeah, this sounds brilliant. This sounds like the sort of thing I want to do. It was before people really used the internet widely. It was like right back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough actually to go to a university where basically they had a pagan society on campus. So I was able to meet people who were identified as witches, who identified as pagan. And while I was there, I had a friend who I lived with who had started getting interested in the Norse tradition as well. So we were both from a place in Britain called Essex, which is very kind of Anglo-Saxon based. So we were looking at so we were at university in Wales, and Wales obviously has a lot of Celtic stuff and lots of great Welsh deities and things. And we were thinking, but how do we get in touch with our own land? And so through the wanting to get interested in the Saxon stuff, I then started getting interested in the Norse deities and the Norse traditions. And it was basically one line in a book, and I can't remember now what the book was. I think it might have been the Kvendalf Gunderson book, but I think maybe Teutonic Magic or something like that. My memory is bad, but it basically sort of said Seath is the female version of the Norse tradition magic. And I thought, wow, that sounds really interesting. That's what I want to do. And, it was a time in the late 90s where everything was really gendered. And, obviously, there's absolutely no reason why women couldn't be doing, Galdra and runes and symbols and things like that. But just the thought of something being more feminine, being, more witch orientated, kind of really sparked my interest. And it was like, something going off in my brain, like a spark, where I went, oh, that's what I want to do.
Ah.
But of course, we didn't know anything about this. We didn't know where to find any more information. We had no idea even how to pronounce it. So my friend was actually doing Anglo-Saxon studies at the time. He was doing a degree in medieval history. So he went to find his Anglo-Saxon teacher and said, how do you pronounce this? Which is why I pronounce it differently to pretty much everyone else in the world, because it was basically this Anglo-Saxon teacher went, well, this is how I think you would pronounce it. And we just went with that. So yeah, we then looked for as much information as possible. There wasn't very much. Another friend actually printed off a page from the Harasana, the Diana Paxson website. And again, where we didn't have a computer, well, we had computers in the house, but we didn't have access to the internet at home in those days. In order to get the internet, I had to sort of go on to campus, which wasn't very far, but wasn't something we tended to do, to use the computers to search for things. I didn't know how to research things in those days. Google didn't exist. So
yeah, sure.
My friend was much, much better at this than I was. And they basically just handed us this page from the internet. And we went, okay, let's try this. And, as the years went on, I found, the Jenny Blaine book came out, which was really helpful. I finally got my hands on the Jan Fries book, Sideways. And then I learned how to research. So once I had the better book, so once I had like Sideways and the Jenny Blaine book, I had a list of sagas and things that Seer mentioned in. So I was able to then spend a bit more time doing research and finding more about it to then try and cobble something together with the little information that I had.
Yeah. But at that time, were you also practicing in a circle or coven, a pagan or Wiccan coven, and doing witchcraft, or was it purely research at this point?
So we were really, really lucky to have a pagan site on campus. So basically, the university had an area of land that they had been told they needed to clean up. So they were using it as a dump. And they said to us, okay, so I think one of the people from the society had gone to the campus and said, look, every religion has their place to worship apart from the pagans. And we had, so there wasn't, we probably had about sort of 10% of the university signed up to the pagan society. They didn't all attend regularly.
That's pretty good.
But it was a huge amount of people. So they were able to say, look, we need somewhere. So they basically gave us this small piece of campus and said, if you tidy it up, you can have it. So it then became a pagan site. So as a group, we were putting on rituals, we were behaving like a coven, but in a more sort of inclusive way. Basically we had to be open for anybody who wanted to turn up. So it was really good.
That's great. It's a great way to learn and get an idea of what resonates with you, with your spirituality too. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And being out in the Welsh countryside was such a wonderful way to learn witchcraft.
Yes.
Then I met during the time at university. In my last year of university, I was initiated into a Wiccan coven. And then I was practicing Wicca. And from that point, a lot of the, so we were practicing our own version of Seer. So we were sort of experimenting a bit at home. But from the point where I joined the Wiccan coven, I then had a much stronger position to be able to learn Seer from, and to be able to kind of have people who were interested, but also were very magically and ritually able. So
Yeah.
I was very, very lucky with that coven, had a lot of really, really strong ritualists in. So
That really helps. So to have a group or a circle that you're really comfortable working with, that gets it and knows how to raise energy and communicate, and the alchemy, create alchemy. It's super, super important.
Absolutely. And as I sort of met war witches, as I did more around London, so eventually I led a coven in London, and I then started a small Seath group. So there was a lot of people who
Yeah, I
were
see. Yeah.
really
And
willing.
did they also, were those people in the coven involved or interested in Norse shamanism or Norse mythology?
So some were and some weren't. So it was a very eclectic coven. So we all sort of worked with what each other were interested in. So we had a couple of people in the coven who were really interested in Egyptian stuff, somebody who was really, really knowledgeable in Welsh mythology and Welsh witchcraft.
Yeah.
So we all sort of worked with each other. And, I was really, really lucky to be part of so many groups of people who just were really, really able to let me experiment. So,
Yeah. It sounds
really,
like a great community, and different than, maybe I'm wrong, but the London scene, pagan scene or Wiccan scene seems a lot more mainstream than I would say here in the States back then. So it's really cool that you had that great support and community at that time.
yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that the London pagan scene has ever really been mainstream. I think the thing that we have within Wicca in the UK, especially, is that we, Alexandrian and
Yeah.
Gardnerian very much mixed together. There's the strain of Wicca that I was involved with was progressive Wicca. So progressive Wicca was always very much more mixed. It was very much more sort of, inclusive, very
Right.
much more. So, the things that I witness in the US at the moment within Wicca, it's a world apart from
Oh,
Wicca in
yeah.
the UK.
Yeah.
We don't have as many rules. We don't have that expectation. There's, if
Yeah.
you are Gardnerian and you want to join an Alexandrian coven, well, lots of our covens are mixed heritage anyway. So
Yeah.
people would look at you and go, well, we're just Wiccan.
Yeah.
But if you're Alexandrian and you want to join a Gardnerian coven, you would never be reinitiated. You would just
Right.
be all the same. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
was
I'm a
clear
Dianic witch and priestess, so I was, involved in covens, Dianic covens, for 10 years, and then started my own circle. But at my own circle, there was definitely a lot of eclectic witches, and some were Dianic and some weren't. But the point is, you learn and you grow and you evolve with your spirituality. So that's, and then everybody's stronger for it.
Absolutely. I think the more inclusive and the more welcoming you are,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
stronger everything is.
Yeah. So getting back to Seidr, it's pronounced I see it Seidr, which is a form of Norse shamanism where there's a seer and there's a certain structure. And could you talk about, a Seidr or Seath ritual and kind of what are the steps and how does it differ from like a Wicca um, Wiccan ritual? Because it seems like from your book, it seems like there's some overlap in the types of, the steps in a Seder or Seath rite, except that usually there isn't a seer or vulva. So, anyway, could you talk a little bit about a Seath or Seder rite?
Well, I think, in so the way that I use the term is basically to describe anything that's been talked about in the Norse sagas as being Seath. So
Yeah, and the Norse sagas are the Icelandic sagas and Eddas. Is that correct?
yeah, so the
Okay.
Eddas, there's less about Seath in the Eddas.
Okay.
It's more, so the sagas are basically like family histories. So it's people telling stories about their ancestors and their family. So the Norse had a thing where if you kept a person's memory alive, then they never died. So you
Right.
kept a person's spirit alive by keeping their memory alive. So you have these great, intricate family histories that people have put together. And this has come originally from sort of oral history and then it's been written down. So
Yeah.
the tales are, it's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
part of the thing I talk about in the book is how much the Norse believed in Seath, how much they believed in the witchcraft. So it's sometimes I think we look at it as being everything that's written down was absolutely what they believed.
Right.
But
Right.
you look at some of our stories and some of our tales, and you look at fairy stories, there's a lot of supernatural stuff that's involved in that we're not necessarily believing as being definitely this happened. So
Yeah. So
sometimes
some of the deities that you invoke are definitely from the Viking age. And we talk about in your book Freya, Odin, and Hel. And so I guess what I'm interested in knowing is like from the Icelandic sagas, how do you derive a Seder rite in 2022? Did you do a lot of research with the Icelandic sagas for inspiration and use that for inspiration in what you currently practice?
So a lot of the Seath that I put together was using other traditions and other things that still
Okay.
existed. So it's a really interesting thing because, um, in 2022, the way I put it together would possibly be very different to the way I put it together in 2002, for example. So I think, we are so much more knowledgeable now about things like cultural appropriation and things like that. Plus, we've got access to a lot more rituals and a lot of different ways that things are done. So
Yeah.
I think the way that I would put it together now would be very different to the way that I would have put it together in 2002 when these rights were just sort of starting to be
Yeah.
together.
But it's
So
kind of based on what you've learned through your research and also reading the Icelandic
hmm,
sagas, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, and also kind of looking at what other people were doing. So looking at
Right.
things like Annette Host, for example, there's a PhD thesis that was written. I so sorry, I can't remember the name of the author now. But she was looking at the group Yggdrasil in,
Right.
I think it was Norway, sorry.
Yeah.
So the work that Annette hosted to create something that was really shamanic based, and the work that Diana Paxson did to create something that was more sort of ritualistic and better to show to groups of people who were beginners.
Yeah.
So I looked at the way that both they had created the high seat, but also looked at things like voodoo, things like the descriptions of the Welsh Arweiniddian tradition, the Scottish spaycraft tradition.
That's a lot of influences.
Yeah,
Pretty
things
cool.
like
Yeah.
the Greek oracles,
Yeah.
the Irish kind of being wrapped in bull hides traditions and stuff. So
Right.
I looked really widely at
Yeah.
other things that were happening and things that were still live and still happening, you know, traditions
Yeah.
that still existed, but also stories from the past.
Right.
So
But one of the key threads that I see can tell is that journeying and inner trance work is used, and that is pretty key to shamanism across the board in many societies. But it's a great way to achieve inner transformation. And when you go into trance in Seath or Seidr, a Seidr rite, that is used. The seer is prophesizing, right, and divining from other like deities such as Odin and Freya and Hel. But they also call upon the Seers, I guess, which are ancestral female spirits. I think it's all just fascinating, and I encourage the my listeners to do their own research and actually read Katie's great book, Seidr, The Gate is Open, because it's so fascinating. Just the fact that you can go so deep into trance work and go through the different gateways and levels. That part I find very fascinating. Seems like such a very unique spiritual experience.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of so like Seeth the Gate is Open was written, you know, decades ago. So my
Yeah.
experience has sort of developed a little bit since then. So I've learned hypnotherapy now.
Right.
I'm, you know, studying for a master's in psychology. So it's interesting, a lot of what I was kind of cobbling together, I now understand a little bit more about what's happening to the brain
Right.
while you're doing this work. So the
Right.
thing I see is that a lot of it really is about the rapport between the audience and the seer. So having that really deep connection and having that space sort of held by the person that's running the rite in order to really kind of have that deep connection. It
Mm-hmm.
really is very much a kind of soul to soul experience where, you know, your core self is connecting with the core self of the people in the core selves of the people in the group, and you're able to really access. And I mean, a lot of the Seath work that I do is very much based on ancestor work. So
Mm.
that's something that I have worked a lot more with now with my work as a hypnotherapist.
That's
So
interesting. That's interesting because I'm curious if your clients come to you with wanting to know more about their ancestors, in wanting to do trance work or inner journeying. Do you find that to be true?
So a lot of it is actually about there's this thing sort of called transgenerational trauma. So it's about understanding how the experiences of your ancestors have shaped the way that your belief
Yes.
systems and your
Yes,
life
I've heard of that. It
work.
can be in your DNA. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot more that we understand now that maybe we didn't, definitely not in 2002. So we sort of the work that we do in Seer in order to communicate with the ancestors is then replicated a lot in when you go into a deep trance in hypnotherapy and you look at the experiences that your ancestors have, which are then part of your soul memory and part of what shapes, even if you just look at the way that your parents parented you, affects the way that you parent, affects, they were affected by the way their parents parented, and on and on. Even if you just look at it as belief system, there is, like you say, there is evidence now to show with work that's being done and research that's being done on Holocaust descendants, and also now the grandchildren of the survivors from 9/11. So we can see that there's certain things in your brain that changes if your parents experienced trauma before you were born.
Right.
So
interesting.
It's
fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask a little bit about how you go about invoking a deity. I mean, say you are a seer, correct? You're
That's
a seer. Correct. So in Seidr, you are becoming, or you are mingling with these deities. How does that feel? I mean, I'm just curious. How does that feel to be that deep in a trance state to speak or communicate with deities?
So it's interesting because it's so long ago that I started this work. I started doing more kind of spiritualist type work with spirits first before I started working with deities. So, you're talking about, as a teenager, starting to do this trance work and starting to, do the shamanic journeying. So it feels so much a part of my brain makeup that it's like, it's like saying to somebody who runs, how does it feel to you, or how does it feel to, what are you thinking about when you cook a meal, when you develop a new recipe? It's some things become so much a part of your makeup.
It sounds like it's very instinctive for you. I was just trying to get a picture of it for my listeners who are not familiar with Seidr or Seith or Norse witchcraft, how a seer becomes a seer and what it feels like.
I think when I'm training seers, so when I'm teaching people how to be seers, what I talk about really sort of being, having a lot of fluidity in your energy. It's about being able to step back. So it's almost sort of a part dissociative experience where you allow your energy to step back to then let the energy of the deity communicate through you. So it's a strong connection.
Yeah, I see where you're going. Okay. And that kind of explains a little bit to the steps of a Seidr or Seith rite, is that there's, you purify the space, you invoke deity, there's a master ceremony, there's drumming, there's dancing and swaying, there's different steps to take you into that, down to that level of trance state. And I think it's fascinating because it just, to me, it does sound like hypnotherapy in some way, or just inner journeying. But it's just very, I don't know, it just seems like a very structured type of rite. But in the end, you're stepping out, like you say, you're stepping out of yourself to communicate.
Yeah, I think it's the way that some traditions think about the soul is they think about the soul as kind of breaking down into different aspects. So the Egyptian tradition, the Egyptian religion had ancient Egypt, had this idea about the soul going into different parts of death. And there are sort of traditions within the Norse where the soul has different parts, and those different parts separate on death. And I think we can do the same thing when we do journeying. So a part of our consciousness, a part of our soul is able to travel, a part of our soul is able to communicate on a different level. So part of what we do in Seer especially is when we're seeing, when we're on the high sea, we're able to have part of our consciousness separated and in the room. So we've got a good rapport with the
Right.
audience. But a part of our soul is, journeyed to Helheim, to the realm of the dead,
Right.
where we're able to have rapport and connection with the spirits that are gathered there. So it really is it's a compartmentalization where you're able to separate part of your
Yeah.
consciousness into two places and to be
Right.
able to have that conversation in two places. And that
Ah, that's
really is
very unique.
it is, and it's such a wonderful
Yeah.
experience to be able
Yeah.
to connect to those two worlds where
Yeah. Well,
you think of
we're almost out of time, Katie, but I do want to just this is really a fascinating discussion, and I'm really just urging my listeners to read your books, and also wanted to ask you what is your website or where social media where people can find out more about you?
so my website is katiegerrard.com. So I
Okay.
have a little bit of information about my books and stuff on there, a tiny amount about the hypnotherapy, and a few things that I'm doing. So I kind of have events and stuff on there.
Yeah. And you have some upcoming workshops and events. Let's see.
That's right. That's right. So
Okay.
myself and a friend of mine, Andre Henricus, who is
Okay.
very well known, more
Okay.
well known than I am probably within kind of heathen circles, are running a online training for Treadwell's bookshop in Seer.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
that's
Wonderful. Okay. So our listeners could potentially attend one of your workshops then.
yeah. So it's
Okay.
a 4 week course, but it's really exciting to be able to be teaching online.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, anyway, this has been a really, really fascinating discussion with you, and I've learned a lot, and I hope my listeners have learned a lot. And I just really wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors, and just keep on witching.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, blessed be, and yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.